Well, a little bit of the background. I'm from Philadelphia,
Okay.
incidentally. And I was singing in bands, but it was mostly doo-wop bands in the mid 60s. And I decided I was going to try my hand at concert promoting. In fact, I was at Woodstock with Jefferson Airplane doing their sound. And yeah, I said, hey, I'm really burnt out from doing this. Well, this was the 60s. I was
Yeah.
driving the truck as well as humping the gear as well as doing the sound. I knew a lot about sound. I
Right.
knew I was a tinkerer as a kid anyway. I was always
Sure.
building radios and stuff like that. So here I am in London, jobless. So I answered an ad in Melody Maker magazine, which is kind of like the Billboard of the UK at that time. One of the things that Pete wanted to do was Ronnie had asked him to build a remote studio in an Airstream caravan, Airstream trailer. Pete was also building his own studio for the album Quadrophenia.
Right.
He wanted to do a quad album, and there wasn't any quad studios.
Right.
A quad requires quad panners and four channels and four speakers and lots of technical stuff. I got the job of starting the Quadrophenia album.
Right.
And I guess I did a good job because they kept me. We tried it out. And Pete said, hey, man, I am not going to make a quad album that sounds worse than the stereo. Pete had this ARP
Right.
2600, which was modular. It was these big modules. There
Right.
was no button on it that said save. And to get a sound, you had to dial it in.
Oh, you say click track. That really surprises me because were a lot of bands using clicks back then? It didn't really seem like it. And for a drummer like Keith Moon to,
We had to tape the headphones around with gaffer's tape around
right.
his head to keep the headphones on.
Did you help him drive the Cadillac into the swimming pool?
But I was asleep and there was a knock at my door and it was an electrician. And he woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, Keith said you'd pay this.
Because I was reading up on the Bad Company record, the first one, the debut
Yeah.
record, which I actually just purchased the reissue of that. And it sounds, I purchased it on vinyl, of course, but it sounds amazing still to this day. How did that relationship come about? And what was that experience like?
And so while the Airstream was at Headley Grange, we just they came down the next week and we worked for 10 days and whacked out those initial songs that they kind of had ready to go. And I went from there into Olympic Studios and we did some background vocals and a couple of solos and mixed it all in like I think the recording took about 10 days to do the initial recording. The mixing another 10 days. So within 3 weeks or 4 weeks, we had finished that. I did not only all the recording, but I mixed them myself too. Well, the second album, after the success of the first album, the second album, I rented this castle called Clearwell Castle in Wales or out at the west end of England. But we used the Rolling Stones truck for the third album. There's no,
Probably.
if there's no big thing like record plant over the door where you feel like you have to perform. I rented the record plant truck for a couple of Babies records and
Okay.
UFO records. I kept doing remote recordings. I loved it. Well, the trick is to have a drummer like that. The only other part was the actual day we did Kashmir, which was called Driving to Kashmir, the title, the original
Right.
title, was the day I got my first Eventide phaser, right? I just had two mics.
Right.
So I took one side of the drums and put it through the Eventide phaser and recorded it on a third track just
Uh,
to check it out.
yeah. Yeah.
It was the Kashmir tune. And so they liked it. and it became part of the track, and it's still on the original recording. I was just messing around with my new toy.
Well, accidents are sometimes the best thing. Going into studio for me personally, it's like you think a song is going to sound a certain way, and then when you go into studio, it changes for whatever reason. Because you're in a different room, you start tinkering around with it, and then when it's done in the mixing.
Hey, must have been good because they want you to do the whole album. Well, I think their Maverick was their label and Madonna's label, and they got a hold of me.